Right, thank you very much, Claire. I'm delighted to be here today to have the opportunity to talk to you about a topic that is both central to my expertise and to my passion, and that is bone health and healthy ageing. But before I launch into my talk, I'd just like to thank Katrina for the talk that she's just given, particularly showing us the staggering statistics and the changes in long-term conditions and chronic ill health that we're going to be faced with over the next coming years. All is not lost though, because movement most definitely is medicine. And one of the things that we see throughout life is that there is this misconception, and as we age, there is this increasingly longer list of the things that we are apparently not permitted to do. And I want to challenge that perception, and I'm hoping that some of the things I talk to you today about will actually go some way towards doing that. So we're all here today because we recognise the critical role that physical activity has in supporting health outcomes for older adults. But throughout life, one of the things that I find is that cardiovascular fitness and generalised mobility are given quite a lot of focus, whereas that's not the same for musculoskeletal health and particularly for bone health. And the fact is that our bone health starts to decline long before we reach older age or advanced frailty. In fact, changes take place from as early as our 40s in our bones, in our muscles, and in our joint health. And what this means is that we need to start taking action and intervention long before the visible signs of ageing appear for us. So today, I'd like to talk to you about the critical role that physical activity can take in maintaining and improving quality of life as we age. Move this on. So just first of all, a little bit of revision. Our skeleton has a number of really important functions. So it provides us with structure, and that structure enables the attachment of tendons, ligaments, tendons, and muscles, which give us mobility. But the skeleton also provides protection for the internal organs, and it's a storage organ for both minerals and for fats. And last but not least, it's the site of blood cell production. Now, when I talk to people about bone health, they're often surprised to hear and to learn that our skeleton isn't inert. It's a constant, dynamically changing organ, and it turns over and remodels regularly throughout life. And the skeleton that you leave here today with will not be the one you walked in with this morning, believe it or not. In babies, it turns over completely in the first year of life. For us as grown adults, it turns over every 5 to 10 years. But it does so in accordance with the demand that we place upon it. If we use it appropriately, it will strengthen. If we don't use it, it will weaken. Very much the use it or lose it principle applies to bone health. Now with our muscles, if we've not used them, we might see muscle loss. We might experience it as weakness or fatigue, or sometimes as failing balance. But we don't have any such feedback mechanism for our bones. We don't see them weakening. Anyway, the good news is that with progressive resistance training, we can improve both our muscle and our bones, but crucially, we can do this at any age. Just want to have a little look here through this bone mineral density graph. I I quite like to point at it, but I'm not sure if you can all see both sides of the room. So bone mineral density, that's a measure of the amount of mineral deposition, such as calcium and phosphorus, in our bones. And that gives the bones strength. Without it, our bones would be flexible and they would bend. So we start off life and we start to develop bone density. And for both males and females, this develops at about the same rate until puberty. And then the hormones start to change, and the male bone density increases at a more rapid rate than females. But what you see, I'll move to the other side, what you see is this plateau at about the age of 30. But you can also see that it's just starting to tail off. But this is the point of peak bone density. And for everybody, it starts to tail off for physiological reasons at about that age. But what you'll see is, as it's gently tailing off, then for women, from about the age of 40 onwards, the loss accelerates. And this is coincident with the perimenopause period. Estrogen has a protective effect on bone. And when we start to lose estrogen, we lose that protection. And that accounts for this very steep decline between the ages of 40 and 60 for female bone density. Once our estrogen's got to its lowest level, then for the later decades, both male and female bone density tail off at about the same level, the same rate. So, we'll just move on now. Many factors affect our bone density and our bone health. So what we eat, our diet affects it, positively and negatively. Alcohol, smoking, and even chronic stress can adversely affect our bone health. But at all ages and at all stages in life, the key stimulus to maintaining and developing bone health is physical activity. Bone responds to mechanical loading. However, not all movement is as effective as others. Cycling and swimming, where the body weight is supported by either the bike or the water, mean that the bones don't get the same physical stimulus that they do with other activities. Of course, cycling and swimming are still to be recommended because they're excellent for cardiovascular fitness and for endurance. But weight-bearing activities such as running, walking, climbing stairs or climbing hills, whilst they're great for stimulating bone remodelling, they're not the be-all and end-all. So research shows us that impact exercises such as hopping, skipping and jumping are really powerful for promoting bone remodelling. And your resistance exercises with resistance bands or weights provide controlled loading to the bones. But that's not all we need to do. We also have to think about balance and coordination. And whilst static balance exercises, for example, standing on one leg while you're brushing your teeth, 2 minutes, twice a day, that's 2 hours free balance practice you've got every month. Whilst those things are good, things like Tai Chi and yoga and Pilates are also really good activities to be promoted and very accessible for us as we age in improving our coordination and balance and so reducing our risk of falls. But this still isn't enough, because what we need to do is we need to do a little bit of all of these things. And what I should say actually is that these things all represent the same 4 S's that we talk about in Live Longer Better. The suppleness, the strength, the stamina and the skill in each of these areas. What we need to do, we need to make sure it's progressive So that means we need to add a little bit on with time as we get used to doing these things. The body gets lazy and it doesn't develop if we keep doing the same things all the time. So it needs to be progressive, it needs to be specific, it needs to be challenging for us, and it needs to be consistent. Think of it a little bit like investing in your bone bank. Regular small deposits across these different areas will ensure that you have a diverse strategic investment and will give you the better returns in the long run. Let's talk about osteoporosis. Osteoporosis is characterised by decreased bone density and a deterioration in the structure of bone. You can all read the figures on the slide. 1 in 2 women, 1 in 5 men will have an osteoporosis-related fracture. The prevalence, though, 2% at the age of 50 and 80% at the age of 80. The other figures on here I find a little bit questionable. There's a suggestion that it's 3 million people that are affected. I actually think it's a lot more, because it's a silent disease, and so called because we only know we've got it generally when we have a fracture. 500,000 fractures a year, apparently. But look at the next figure down. The National Osteoporosis Society, in their survey, their study, found that 1 in 5 people break 3 or more bones before they get a diagnosis. And this is something that I can certainly relate to. One often talks to people, as I do in workshops, and they will tell me that, that this is the case. They had a bit of backache. They didn't even visit the GP. It was after they were gardening or doing some other activity. And it happened again, and eventually they went to see the GP only to find they x-rayed their spine to find that they had 2 or 3 crushed fractures. So those hadn't been recorded. How do we find out we've got it? Well, a special x-ray, known as a DEXA scan, is actually the gold standard for identifying osteoporosis. We can see it on plain x-rays, but by the time we see it, it's often quite advanced. Is it reversible? Quick show of hands, who thinks it's reversible? Who thinks it isn't? Okay. I'm here to tell you that it's not only reversible, it's preventable and reversible. You'll get a copy of these slides. I urge you to look at the Liftmore study, 2018, Stephen Watson and colleagues. One of the things that they did was to take a cohort of older people with osteoporosis and put them through a high-intensity resistance training program. And they demonstrated that osteoporosis was reversible. But let's bring it slightly closer to home. This is a client, and you may not be able to see the screen terribly well, but the 2 sides of the screen represent the results of 2 DEXA scans taken 30 months apart, 2.5 years apart. This client had the first DEXA scan in May 22, expecting it to be normal, but unfortunately it showed her results to be osteoporotic. Now, she was fit and active, ate a healthy diet, didn't smoke, didn't drink at all. But she did 2 things. She went to see her GP. So did I mention she's in her early 60s? She went to see her GP, and as a result of the conversation, she started using HRT. Now, HRT is going to replace the replace the estrogen that she's lost. That means that it will slow down the rate of bone loss. But what it won't do is reverse it. So the other thing that we did was to commence her on a high-intensity resistance training program incorporating the protocol that the Liftmore study had used. 2.5 years later, in November last year, she had another DEXA scan. And again, you probably can't see the results here on the screen. But staggeringly, she had improved her bone density. 16% in her lumbar spine, 14% in her left hip, and 9% in her right hip. So much so that she questioned whether either of the scans had been accurate, but was assured that GE, who the company that provide the scanners, and it was the same scanner each time, with regular maintenance and so on and so forth, these results were indeed accurate. However, this lady, as well as she was reeling from the shock of being told that she had osteoporosis, as she was leaving the scanner unit, the radiographer said to her, "Whatever you do, be very careful not to fall over." She hadn't even thought about that. But these words left her feeling very vulnerable and fearful for a few days afterwards. And this is a perfect illustration of how we, as practitioners, can actually introduce barriers to physical activity that helps our clients and patients. And we're all clients and patients as well. But our language and our assumptions and our approach can create these unintended barriers. And as in this case, the radiographer's well-intentioned words fall probably into the category, I'm sure you'd agree, of overprotectiveness. But there are other barriers as well. Pain and discomfort, reinforcing the perceptions that frailty, or any condition in fact, is irreversible. But I guess the one that concerns me most is this ongoing perception amongst people, particularly over the age of 50, that it's too late to do anything to improve your muscular health or indeed to improve your bone health. We need to reframe that conversation. So I'd like to consider one particular barrier today that I think affects us all as patients and clients ourselves, and when we're dealing with our patients and clients. And it's the survival mechanism. This little spot at the end of the blue, reverse C as it were, in the brain, it's called the amygdala. We have one in each side of the brain, in each of the hemispheres. And its role is survival. It's the point in our brain, it's the primal emotional centre in fact. It's the point in our brain when faced with a threat, whether that is real or perceived. This goes into action and it brings about what we know as the fight, flight or freeze response. It's instinctive, it's reflexive, and it's based on previous experience. Now that experience might actually be something we've experienced, but it might also be something that we've seen either happen in other people or in a video or a film or something on television. But critically, it overrides everything else. It's like pressing a big red button. It stops all voluntary action and it prevents rational thought. So a clinically relevant example might be having a client who is fearful of taking a particular step or performing a particular resistance activity through fear of injury or falling. Now, in addition to their amygdala response being dominant, our own amygdala might become fearful. And it might react as maybe we've done in a previous setting. And we may inadvertently reinforce the client's fear of avoidance. So I have a little approach to this, which is called the 4 Ps response. There are various other versions out there I've found since. But it's actually a way of actually putting a brake on the amygdala response so that we pause. That puts that brake on. We can then process what's going on, both for us and for the client, maybe exploring it with the client, what the fear, what's sitting underneath the fear, not making assumptions. And we can explore for ourselves, why are we hesitant about encouraging this client to take these steps? Then we can prepare. So we can then look at the other options that are available to us in going forward and make a plan, and then we can proceed. And what we're doing here is allowing the prefrontal cortex, which is the part that does all this processing, planning and decision making, to actually do its job and hopefully positively move forward with the client. Anyway, we're going to explore that in a lot more detail for ourselves this afternoon at the workshop. So I think I've covered quite a lot of ground here, but the key messages that I want to give you today are that to remember that bone health declines early, but we can't see it. And so we need to think about supporting it long before it might become a problem. Our bones will adapt to demand. The more demand we place on them, in the many different ways we can do so, the stronger they'll become. But not all exercise is equal. That's not to say we shouldn't be doing all exercise, but we need to be mindful of the ones that we ourselves can do for ourselves that will improve our bone density. Crucially, osteoporosis is both preventable and reversible with the right course of action. And age isn't a barrier. Our bodies are remarkable things, and they will respond to stimulation whatever age we are. It's never too late to start, or indeed too early. We do need to think about barriers and what those challenges are, both in ourselves and for our clients and patients. But finally, last but not least, and possibly most important, our perception shapes our behaviour. So reframing whatever situation it is as modifiable is empowering, both for ourselves and for everyone else. Thank you.